Stand by. Tanks for Ukraine. A watershed moment for the country, perhaps? Is it a watershed moment for Germany after much pondering and perhaps prevaricating? The Chancellor Olaf Scholz breaking with a 7 decades-old non-aggression policy. Yeah, how momentous? Did he dither and cave to pressure? Or did he drive a hard bargain to make sure Berlin didn't go out alone on a limb? As German media were breaking the story, the United States was granting Scholz his wish, the sending of US-made Abrams tanks, which come on top of UK Challenger 2s, a new phase for NATO's main supplier, or a symbolic gesture to cover the Germans. Fact is, the German-made Leopard is Europe's workhorse tank. Berlin's green light opens the door for the likes of Poland, Finland, Norway's the latest, to provide their own. Will tanks change the outcome on the battlefield? And how will Russia respond to a new raising of the ante by Ukraine's allies? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking just how much of a watershed moment it is. And joining us from Berlin, Joachim Bitterlich, former German ambassador to NATO, professor at the ESCP Business School. Thanks for joining us.
A pleasure to be with you.
From Gdansk in Poland, Karolina Zbigniewska, editor-in-chief of news website Euractiv Poland. Welcome back to the show.
Good evening.
Georges Kuzmanovic is president of the République Souveraine Party. How would you translate that? Sovereign Republic?
For a sovereign republic.
The Sovereign Republic Party.
Good evening.
Also an Army Reserve officer.
Yeah.
Should point that out. Former. From Lyon, we have another former military man, Thibault Fouillet, former military officer, researcher today at the French defense think tank, the Foundation for Strategic Research. Welcome.
Good evening.
The France 24 debate, where you could join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, a lot of pressure and hard bargaining. Germany's all in now on the tanks, though. Laurent Berstecker has the story.
It could be a turning point in Germany's foreign military policy. For the first time since World War II, the country has opted to send lethal weapons to Ukraine, a zone of active conflict. A sovereign decision which wasn't influenced by external pressure, according to Olaf Scholz.
This is the result of intensive consultations with our allies and international partners. This was the right thing to do, and we didn't let anyone influence us.
For months, Ukraine had been calling on its allies to ramp up military support and provide tanks to help with the war effort. Germany was initially reluctant, as it feared taking an active part in the conflict, but eventually changed its mind amid growing international backlash. It pledged Wednesday to send an initial 14 Leopard 2 tanks and to train Ukrainian soldiers on how to use them. It also crucially gave the green light for other European countries to ship their German-made tanks to Ukraine, which could now be receiving up to 100 armored vehicles over the next few months. Moscow, meanwhile, warned the move could end up dragging Germany into the conflict, but also tried to minimize its impact.
These tanks will burn down just like all the other ones, except they cost a lot, and this will fall on the shoulders of European taxpayers.
Since the start of its so-called special operation, Russia has repeatedly warned against Western interference and even threatened to use nuclear weapons if any red lines were crossed.
Joachim Bitterlich, is it truly a historic moment for Germany?
I think so, yes. You have always to bear in mind from where the Germans are coming in reality. Let's call them the most pacifistic European country and NATO member at the same time. And I think Olaf Scholz is right to speak about Zeitenwende, this watershed moment in post-war German history. It's true, on the one hand, he has been under pressure, yes. On the other hand, what he has been underlining, I think he is right there, maintaining control of sending any armament and doing this in a strong and permanent coordination with the most important allies, especially with US and with France.
Yeah, and among the list of world leaders tweeting their thank you notes to Olaf Scholz, his Polish counterpart, Mateusz Morawiecki, he'd been threatening to send Leopard tanks without Berlin's approval. Thank you, Chancellor. The decision to send Leopards is a big step towards stopping Russia. Together, we are stronger. Karolina Zbytniewska, you heard Joachim Bitterlich use that expression in Germany, Zeitenwende, turning point. What's the feeling where you are?
I have a feeling that 11 months ago, straight after the Russian invasion, Olaf Scholz gave his big Zeitenwende speech. And this watershed moment starts only to happen almost 1 year later. Oh, better late than never, but it's still very late. Little the original Zeitenwende speech didn't change, but it still became, I don't know if you are aware of it, the German word of the year 2022. So Scholz described back then the attack as a historic turning point, but we had to wait for that. But I can still see the arguments for hesitancy, although I would prefer to see more leadership that Olaf Scholz already promised 1 year ago and repeated this promise several times during the year. So not seeing that leadership, I can see, as I already mentioned, some arguments why the hesitancy lasted so long. So apart from, of course, responsibility for the horrors of the World War II that make Germany, as it was already mentioned, the most pacifist country in NATO probably and the European Union, there are real fears concerning potential escalation. They are still alive and they have their rationale. But also the opinion polls in Germany show that the country, the citizens are really divided. And even according to some polls, a little bit more citizens are against sending the tanks than not to send them. So it's the division of around 40 to 40. The polls differ a little bit, but there is a huge divide. And the real political leader, I think, can and is able to explain the political reasons and to influence the mind of the citizens, why it's the moment that we should really stand together and help the Ukrainians.
Right.
Can I continue?
I was just going to say, picking up on what you said there, you question Olaf Scholz's ability to lead in this crisis, what some may describe as hesitancy, and we heard Joachim Bitterlich allude to it, would say rather that it is careful coordination. Olaf Scholz greenlighting the Leopards because he knew the other shoe was about to drop several hours later, Dateline Washington. A few hours after the Chancellor's speech before the German parliament, Joe Biden announcing a battalion of Abrams tanks, 31 of them, with NATO allies supplying at least 2 battalions of Leopards, says Biden. Dismissed are those claims of testy conversations last week between Berlin and Washington.
I'm grateful to Chancellor Scholz for providing German Leopard 2 tanks and will lead an effort to organize a European contribution of 2 tank battalions for Ukraine. I want to thank the Chancellor for his leadership and his steadfast commitment to our collective efforts to support Ukraine. Germany has really stepped up. The Chancellor has been a strong, strong voice for unity, a close friend, and for the level of effort we're going to continue.
Thibaut Fouillet, did Olaf Scholz lead from behind or drive a hard bargain?
No, I totally agree. I think it's a turning point, but because of European and US pressure. And it's also a turning point, but made by the European precedent, because when France engaged to provide a light tank, the AMX, and when the British are engaged to provide a Challenger, and now the Americans provide Abrams, I think with the European pressure of Poland, France, and all NATO allies, Scholz doesn't have any choice to send Leopard and to allow these tanks to go to Ukraine. I think it's a turning point, but because of the European and US pressure more than in Olaf Scholz leadership in Europe. And if we go back to the past, Germany always was always shy to engage military or to engage with military supply, even when there was a European operation in Africa, like Takuba or Barkhane. So it's a turning point because of pressure, I think.
Turning point because of pressure from Germany's allies. George Kuzmanovic, you heard there Carolina saying that Olaf Scholz delivering 11 months too late on the turning point that he promised.
Yeah, but 11 months ago, there was still the Nord Stream existing. And in the contrary of what Olaf Scholz said, I think is a very strong external pressure that make him take this very hard decision. And the external pressure comes from the United States. The thing is simple. All the industry in Germany depends on Russian gas, and it's cut. So if he don't want a complete collapse of his economy, he has to complain to what USA are asking, and they are asking to send this. It was said half of the German population doesn't agree. It's the same here in France, and there is no public discussion. There is no discussion, at least at the French Parliament, in order if we should or not should send tanks. So yeah, I think it's an extra pressure, and it's also complicated in a symbolic way. 8 years ago, you had Panther Panzer and Tiger Panzers who were going on the same direction against Russia. Now it will be Leopard tanks. I think it was a big problem in Germany because of the World War II. So they have Germany. Olaf Scholz has to deal with it, and I'm surprised because we are sending tanks, but in very few tanks. I mean, 31 Abrams.
Let's look at
a few Leopards.
Let's look at the numbers because it's according to Joe Biden, 31. The equivalent of one Ukraine battalion of Abrams and at least 2 European ones, and that's a start. 14 of those will actually come from Germany, but since the Leopard is so widely used throughout Europe, they're also going to come from other NATO allies.
Will you see that? I don't know. But you have other problems. First, you have to train these people. And everybody knows it's at least like minimum 1 month. Usually it's 2, and if not 3 months. Then you have the problem of maintenance and the problem of logistics. And Abrams are not Leopard tanks. They're complicated things. It's very difficult to organize 2 different lines of logistics.
So are you suggesting they should not be exporting tanks to Ukraine?
No, we suggest that our position is to go out of the war and to have a France who is discussing with the Russians and the Americans to end this war, not to escalate the war. But that's our position. But here, if we discuss the support in Ukraine, if you want, let's say we want the defeat of Russia and we go to war against Russia, it's very strange on a military point of view not to organize the thing differently and to build a big tank army near Kyiv in order to launch a large attack.
Well, let me put it to Thibault Fouillet then. Thibault Fouillet, what is French public opinion think of this decision to send in the tanks?
It's complicated because if we see the French public opinion, of course it's a democracy, so it can be a lot of different type of opinions. Some sovereignists say that we do not escalate war, but I think there is a kind of consensus to help and to support Ukraine, and it's not a problem when our presidents say we need to supply Ukraine or to deliver light tanks. So I think it's a problem of a red line and how we can push back the red lines. And it seems that this kind of supply, this kind of new deliver tank, a light or heavy tank, it's not a cross of the red line. So I don't think the public opinion in France is really concerned, especially on the tank deliver, but it's the argues are on the differences between how much we need to support Ukraine with the risk to escalate war. I think it's more on this issue, not especially on the tank supply.
Joachim Bitterlich, we heard both the U.S. president and the German chancellor once again stressing that they did not want to conquer Russia, and this was not an offensive war against Moscow. If we look at the map of what it takes, and you heard Georges Kuzmanovic there talking about how long it takes to train tank drivers, the fighting is continuing. The front lines barely budged in the past week, except for a few small gains by the Russians in the north and near the flashpoint town of Bakhmut. How much do tanks, though, change the equation?
Well, the idea of the Germans is to send what I call a defensive force to Ukraine. Delivery probably what Berlin's estimating end of March. This means 2 battalions to reinforce the existing Ukrainian forces. You need to train them, you need to prepare, all okay. But you mentioned their German leadership. You know, till now, the Germans have been avoiding a too strong European leadership because they know exactly what does this mean in the perception of the others, including Poland, as an example. For example, the pressure from Poland is not the most liked in Berlin. The Germans discuss these subjects, first of all, with the Americans, second with the French, and then with other European allies. The tanks are, let's say, it's my idea as I see it now. I've been reluctant insofar, but looking at the overall situation, it means that the Ukrainians may get back the occupied areas from the Russians by at least, let's say, in the first round, 2 battalions composed by European Leopards, and then in the second phase by the 31 Abrams from the US, in order to re-establish a certain balance and to allow this Ukrainian military leadership, which is really astonishing for any observer, so place, in a modern way. And this could allow to them, let's say, to re-establish this balance and to proceed in order to liberate Ukraine from the Russians.
So you're saying that the tanks really are a game changer. Coupled with that, Joachim Bitterlich, we've had Ukraine's defense minister promising, and he remained vague, quote, more good news soon. Is that just, the information battle, fog of war, or...
No, but please. Well, this whole war is an information battle at the same time. Many of my friends do not believe anymore any figure pointed out by either by the Russians or by the Ukrainians. But you have to add to these tanks the delivery of a certain number of most modern solar-air missiles and missiles in order to fight against tanks, etc. When you look at the overall promises done in the last, let's say, last week by different European nations, when you look at this could be really a certain game changer, at least for what the Ukrainians expect, a new offensive on the Russian side in spring. Please be aware of this.
Karolina Zbitniewska.
Asked here in Berlin.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Karolina Zbitniewska, we had the German Chancellor after that speech before the Bundestag in the company of Iceland's prime minister and saying it would be much more than just tanks that Germany would be pledging, with more military equipment to come. He remained vague, but still. Do you agree with Joachim Bitterlich that it's not just the tanks?
Yes.
Yes, of course, and it has never been the talk of just the tanks, and I cannot deny that Germany has been supplying and supporting Ukraine so far a lot, and as my predecessor mentioned, many of the information cannot be disclosed because it's also the information war happening. So certainly it will be more than tanks, because only to supply and to maintain the tanks, the other equipment is needed. Also the artillery. Not only, also the artillery shells for the tanks. So there is a lot needed. A huge supply chain to each of the tanks, for the Abrams, for the Leopards, for the Challengers, and if Leclercs happen, also for them. It's never just the tanks.
Never just the tanks. And while the United States goes all in with... Go ahead, Joachim Bitterlich.
The more you use from one type of weapon, the easier logistics and maintenance is.
And so that, of course, points to the Leopard tank, is what you're saying. And it's
what's
not
happening.
It's not. Go ahead.
Oh, no. Hello.
Yeah, there's a bit of a.
Hello.
Can you hear me now?
Huh?
All right, there seems to be a technical issue. We're going to try to patch up the audio link there with Berlin. While the United States goes all in, it's on a scale, of course, that Europe cannot match. The New York Times reporting that the Pentagon is racing to boost production of artillery shells to levels unseen since the Korean War by a multiple of 5 within the next 2 years. And saying while the Pentagon has focused on fighting wars with small numbers of more expensive precision-guided weapons, Ukraine is largely relying on howitzers, firing unguided shells. A lot of ammo has been used. Georges Kuzmanovich, French weekly Le Canard Enchaîné, reporting that the French Defense Ministry has also been caught off guard, and for a period of years and decades, thinking nuclear deterrence was the answer in any case. Now realizing that old school guns and ammo are what's needed. Has this been a surprise for you, the way this war has gone?
Well, for me, no. I was among those people who said that the type of army we've built these last 30 years was a catastrophe. I mean, we almost destroyed the French capacity. You have to know that in the beginning of the 90s, we had 1,500 heavy tanks in France. Now we have 220, and 1/3 is not working. So we almost can't send anything to Ukraine, maybe 40 tanks maximum, that's it. So yeah, and we don't have shelves. The French, they discovered, like when it was the COVID crisis, we're not producing anything. We're not producing our ammos. We have 1 week of ammos if there is a big war. So yeah, it's a problem, but you can't rebuild.
It's impressive, those numbers from the United States, the way that they can up their production so fast within a period of 2 years.
United States is a big country, a big industry, and they have half of the world defense budget. So, of course, they can do it. But we raised, the President Macron raised the budget, the French budget, which is a good thing. I don't think it's enough. But
to the tune of some 400 billion he promised.
In 7 years. Yeah.
Over 7 years.
Which is which is good for France, but right now we can't help much. I mean, France, we can't help much. Ukraine.
You mentioned those Leclerc tanks. According to,
I would like to. We have to remember that we already, we already send a lot of tanks, especially the Polish. They've sent all the T-72.
The old Soviet-made tanks.
All the Czechs and it's more than 300, 400 tanks. They have been all destroyed. I mean, it's far more than what we're sending right now. And it's not because they have more modern technology that they won't be destroyed. So I'm very surprised by this amount of tanks that are being sent to Ukraine. And if they think that with these so few tanks, they can stop the large offensive that is expected from the Russian.
President Zelensky says he needs 300.
Yeah, it's logical.
All right,
I mean, the Russians, they start the war with 180,000 soldiers. It's nothing. I mean, for a country large like Ukraine, and now they're gathering tanks, they're gathering the also modern Armata, which was not used. It's the modern Russian tank, and then bringing it there by hundreds. So,
Thibault Fouillet, do you believe in a Moscow surprise, or that the Russians have more in reserve, pardon the pun, more in the tank when it comes to armament, more planes in reserve, more armored vehicles?
Yeah, of course, but I don't think it's the issue in this tank supply, and I don't think it's a problem of mass, because if we remember at the beginning of this war, if we look only in the differences between the amount of armaments, Russia must crush Ukraine. But it's not the point. The point is with that Joseph Enrotin called the techno-guerrilla, the use a mix between low technology and high technology, and defensive in deep. Ukraine resists, and now they need modern tanks, not in order to fight along the entire front line, but they want to create brigades to act to do a breakthrough in an offensive.
And when you hear George Kosmanovich saying, if you send the tanks, they're just going to be destroyed, what's your reaction?
Of course, but it's a war, and I agree with what it said. It's not a question of the first deliver of these tanks. It's a question of in month after month, and of course after the offensive, because it is after the offensive the question of deliver new tanks, more tanks to overcome the attrition, to overcome the loss of tanks. It will be decisive in order to have a successive offensive, and it's a point noticed by Ukrainian force when they said we need 300 tanks, 500 Howitzer. It's in order to not to have only one offensive, but to have successive offensive in months.
So the figures given by that weekly newspaper, the Canard Enchaîné, is that France, in its arsenal, has something like originally 500 of these Leclerc tanks. Only 226 are operational currently. The French president, though, nonetheless, when he was in the company of the German Chancellor over the weekend here in Paris, opening the option of sending some to Ukraine.
I have asked the defense minister to work on this issue. Nothing is ruled out. It should not be escalatory, and we have always taken this approach. Secondly, it should provide real and effective support to our Ukrainian friends.
Joachim Bitterlich, the irony is Germany's being criticized, but many believe that the French will never be able to send any of their Leclerc tanks to Ukraine. Your thoughts? Joachim Bitterlich?
Yes. I thought you put the question to our French colleague. But for me, well, President Macron has announced it to examine the question. But when you look at strategy, you need a certain number to have a certain cohesive force. And to give now to the Ukrainians 2 battalions, this means around 80 Leopards, means a cohesive force. And therefore, when I saw the British sending 14 Challengers with a totally different ammunition in comparison to any other European, I put a certain question mark on this. What the Ukrainians need is a certain, what you call a firepower to some extent. And the French have always, as the Germans, have to look at the question at the same time, am I weakening my own forces for our own defense? And this is even for Olaf Scholz or for Emmanuel Macron an important question. And when you look at the real state of the German army is today in a poor state at the end of the day. And the Germans are not only delivering Leopards now, the Ukrainians will get 7 other Gepards, anti-air tanks. This means they will have 2 battalions. They will deliver a battery of Patriot missiles, Sol-Air, and the 40 Marder, comparable to what the French and the Americans and some other Europeans are doing on armored vehicles. And what you need is a certain cohesive force. And I think the Ukrainians have been defending themselves in an astonishing way up till now, working with material from different East European countries, not always the same, different types, different age, etc. And this was a real challenge for them. And the presence of now 80 tanks, German-built, will help them to present a more cohesive force in front of the Russians, even if the Russians are reinforcing their own forces.
Karolina Zbytniewska, after this discussion about how heterogeneous that army of tanks will be, is it still the turning point that Ukraine needs, the game changer, if you will?
We will see that, but the game changer would be the sustainability of the Western support. So it shouldn't end with today's and yesterday's declarations by the Germans and the Americans. So here I agree with Thibault about the issue of sustainability, that we should be able to give the new tanks and services for maintenance of them 1 month after month after month. But also, as Joachim says, it's very much about coherence of support. The less diversified the support, the better, the easier, the cheaper. But these different origins of support have a huge symbolic value, that we as the West stand together and we all give our weapons. I can understand Germany that it has waited for Americans to promise Abrams tanks, because we kind of cannot, we are not prepared for Russia attacking just Europe. We need to have Americans on board with their military power. So we need coherence, we need the sustainability of support, and we need to be brave.
To be brave, you're saying. Moscow, meanwhile, warning.
And you may add, please.
Joachim
You
Birulich.
may add 1 sentence, please, François Picard. One first lessons learned from this war is that the Europeans need a more cohesive armament. When you look at the different types the Europeans are delivering, it's not easy for the Ukrainians to use these different types. And what the Europeans in NATO need for me, and the Europeans among themselves, first of all, is another, let's say, policy of armament.
A different policy of armament. George Kuzmanovic.
You have the same type in different armies.
But George Kuzmanovic, you were bemoaning the reality, which is the United States has the means. Europe doesn't. For years, they've been talking about this Franco-German program of building a common tank. Is that a good idea, and should it be accelerated?
Well, if we take the Treaty of the Élysée, that was signed in '62, that was the goal of the General de Gaulle, to build something strong, but we destroyed it completely.
So would a Franco-German tank program be a good idea?
I don't know. The thing is that all the so-called European defense is under NATO, and until it's under NATO, we'll never have anything that is
But you just heard Joachim Birlich arguing for a different way in Europe, and that there needs to be a common European defense.
Yes, but not under NATO.
Not under.
And I would like to stress another point: is that war is not only sending guns and ammunition and counting how many people are dead on the front. It's larger. It's geopolitical and economical. And if you remember the beginning of the war, 11 months ago, everybody thought that Russia will win like in 2 weeks. I thought that, everybody. And it was the case. The Ukrainians resisted very bravely. But we also thought that we will push some sanctions and Russian economy will collapse. And we have this war on the Russian level and on the economical level, sorry. On the Russian side, well, there is no collapse. It's even better. Their economy is very strong, and it's on our side that our economy is right now very fastly collapsing. And I don't know.
Fastly collapsing?
Yes, exactly.
We had statistics today that said Germany will now avoid a recession. It was supposed to go into one.
You will agree that in 2021, our commercial deficit was beneficial. It was plus 126 billion. And now for the year 2022 is minus 266 billion. So it's a loss of 300.
But at what point do you put aside economics? This is a sovereign nation invading another sovereign nation here in Europe.
I do not say the contrary, but you have an inflation, you have a debt crisis, you have many problems coming together, and don't know how long will be the popular support, which is not very strong right now, to send more money, more weapons to a war that is not won, and with our leaders praying for a victory of Ukrainians.
Praying for a fast victory.
Yeah, but if there is no fast victory, our economy will collapse.
Thibault Fouillet, would the economy collapse if the war drags on for years?
I don't know. I disagree on one point. Yes, we see the Russian economy is strong, but we also see European will and European economy is strong. We question the resilience of European countries when we will be in winter because of the Russian gas, the European dependence of Russian gas, and we can see that this dependence is lower than we expect. And I think, of course, this is a war of attrition, it's a long war, and economic sanctions made for a long time are not the best way to win. But we can't say that this war is not in the good way for Ukraine, because if you see it, 11 months ago, we think Ukraine will collapse. And a month after, you think Mykolaiv and Odessa will collapse. And we never thought that Ukrainian forces can do counter-offensive. We have this debate this summer. And now we have Kherson, Kharkiv, took back by Ukraine. So, of course, it's a long war, but we can't say that the international aid for Ukraine, the European supply and action for Ukraine are not efficient.
Let's just talk quickly. Go ahead. Very briefly.
Just quickly. You know perfectly that Algeria, Argentina, Iran asked to join the BRICS. That Argentina, Brazil, Iran, Saudi Arabia, China are making business with their own currency, not using dollar. What is yesterday we heard that a South African naval army is training with the Russian naval army and the Chinese naval army. Algerians are buying 12 billion of Russian material, which is across the Mediterranean Sea. So if we'll see at the larger scale, I'm not sure that we're winning here.
What we need to do, we need to stop to supply Ukraine to accept the invasion of a country in our borders, in the European border and the NATO border. I agree with you. Of course, it's a geopolitical argument. Of course, Russia does not collapse, but we need to accept. We need to accept the invasion of Ukraine. We need to accept that, okay, this is a long war, so we stop to supply Ukraine. We stop to act with economic sanction. I don't know. I don't think it's a good way.
It's not the good way. Let's listen to the Russian president. After the German chancellor's announcement, he didn't directly address the issue of the tanks. Vladimir Putin, though, giving something of a history lesson to students at Moscow State University. He harked back to Germany's occupation after the Second World War by the Allies. And here, the former KGB desk chief in Dresden claiming that only the Soviet Union formalized the end of that occupation status.
И, строго говоря, формально и юридически,
And strictly speaking, in a legal sense, it's US occupation forces that are on the territory of the Federal Republic of Germany. And that's what's happening. There's a lot of them there. And German politicians themselves say that Germany has never been a sovereign state in the full sense of the word. A lot of what is happening has deep roots and certain foundations. Of course, the time will come, and there's no doubt about it, when Europe will somehow restore its sovereignty.
Суверенитет будет возвращен Европе.
Germany's never been a sovereign state in the full sense of the word. Joachim Bitterlich, do you feel like you're sitting in an occupied country?
Not at all, but it's marvelous to listen to Vladimir Putin with his, let's say, deep disinformation about what I call historical realities. This is and where we are in. And it's true, we have to look at, let's say, how to deal with Russia in the future at the same time. It's true, the sanctions have not really hit the Russian economy. They have been touched upon, yes. The difficulties of the Russian economy will begin much more. But I do not share the view that the Western economies are in front of a collapse, not at all. I don't look at figures, but I see at the real state of our economies up till now. And by the way, look at the Chinese interest. Someone mentioned China. China is taking more and more steps to get, let's say, away from the Russian standpoint. More and more. Because for the Chinese, this development is dangerous for their own policy. And please, it's true, what we have to do as Europeans is to convince others to follow our standpoint. This is true. And I don't think we have done enough insofar in the first 11 months of this war. It's clear. But please, the Russians feel today, let's call it in a corner, they feel in a certain depression, political one. They feel they hate this minor status towards the US. They feel in a certain paranoia to be encircled, as always. This is Russian history. And what our problem will be is in future how to deal with this Russia.
Karolina Zbitniewska.
Even after Putin.
Karolina Zbitniewska, very quickly, because we're running short on time, but how do you, as leaders, deal with Moscow and that paranoia mentioned by Joachim Bitterlich? Has the messaging been correct out of Washington and Berlin this Wednesday?
I think it has been very correct. It is a show of unity of NATO and the Western alliance, why we shouldn't pay too much attention to what Putin and Kremlin say out loud, as it's like clowns that are only stretching their muscles. And I wouldn't also listen to arguments brought, for example, by George, because these are supplying arguments against sending Leopards and other weapons, and supplying Ukraine in its defensive war against a very aggressive aggressor that has breached the international law and any ethical, humanitarian, and legal standards.
All right, consensus on that last point about the shock of that invasion. I want to thank you, Karolina Zbitniewska, for being with us from Gdansk, Joachim Bitterlich in Berlin, Thibaut Fouillet in Lyon, Georges Kuzmanovic. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.